I'm an optimist. There's a lot of interesting technology that's enabling a lot of companies that could help feed the planet. So as an example, as a diode goes down in price, I built a company, AeroFarms, that was basically a diode is used as an LED, a light-emitting diode, and the cost of light goes down, and that enabled an industry of vertical farming. With Aspire, we grow insects, and there, the ability for fully controlled agriculture to control temperature at different stages of an insect's growth, coupled with automation and robotics, can bring down the cost of producing those insects, and people are becoming more aware of how much not only a protein costs, but what are the resources to produce that protein.
But you're not growing insects for us, it's for animal feed at the moment.
We're doing it for animal feed, okay. Correct. We have
so everyone can
sold
calm
it
down.
In the US. When I couldn't get my kids to eat it and pass that ick factor, we decided to focus on animal feed.
Yeah. But you couldn't get your kids to eat it, you said.
Correct. That ick factor is pretty powerful.
Good barometer in terms of who will consume this.
But in the US, maybe in other parts of the world, they do, in fact, eat insects. And then another company, Every, we genetically sequenced an egg, and we produce the eggs through precision fermentation. But all of the innovation in genetic sequencing is really unlocking a whole opportunity. So whether it's AI that speeds up the genetic sequencing or understanding the environmental impacts to produce a plant or produce an insect, there are huge opportunities with robotics and so forth to bring down the cost to make these proteins or vegetables much more affordable and much more abundant locally and geographically, globally.
Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome Michael Mlinar, the Deputy Executive Director at UN Habitat. Welcome, sir. You just missed a fantastic start to the conversation. We're talking about insects. Not for human consumption, but for animal feed for right now. But really fantastic to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. We're talking about the overall theme, and of course it's the last drop, sustainable resource diplomacy. You're at UN Habitat, you're focusing on building cities, sustainability, and the cities and areas of the future down the line. It was interesting, we were seeing some incredible mapping and satellite imaging from Andrew Zoli a short while ago, and he was showing us where there are where people are densely populated in certain areas, those are more prone to food insecurity and so forth. And it's like, how do you solve these issues? How is UN Habitat thinking about food security in some of the most densely populated cities around the world?
Thanks very much for having me. Apologies for being late. We had another important event, so running from one to the other. Well, as you know, our future is urban. And right now we have about 50% of the population in the urban centers globally. It will be 70% by 2050. And in places like Dubai or the UAE, it's close to 100%. So we have to design solutions, including on food security, together with our cities, in cooperation with the local and regional authorities and other actors. And all these challenges are interrelated, indeed. And then talking globally about housing and sustainable city challenges where, for example, we have the huge issue of informal settlements or slums, if you will, and other related challenges, food supply and the issue of providing people with predictable but also safe food is crucial. So in what we do best in urban planning and designing urban policies, advising governments and other actors on those, we always prioritize also the issues of health and food security.
I mean, it's so interesting what you're saying. I often think about this, if the store down the road from my house or, any store in Dubai would close down, shut down, I would have no way of producing any food.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's a scary thought. If the water had to turn off, I open the tap, I've got no water. It's like we're so reliant and heavily dependent. I mean, do you see a situation, a scenario where we have more independence in terms of the way we feed ourselves at a micro level?
We have some good examples of local communities getting more involved, even in the urban context, in food production.
Yeah.
You can use rooftops. Often you can use even small garden or green areas in newly built urban centers or urban housing units. And I think we need to give more and more room to those solutions. And share. And actually it's part, believe it or not, it's part of our smart cities work. We are now developing what we call international guidelines for people-centered smart cities. And the people-centered is of course a crucial concept there. And those international guidelines need to be ready by May of 2025. The work is already ongoing. We have a working group of 31 experts, and this is certainly part of the issue. We may be having one of our regional consultations here in Dubai on the same, and it's part of an invitation that I can share with you that our next World Urban Forum will be held in Cairo, in Egypt. In November of this year. And again, linkages of urban development also to the issue of food security are there.
Fantastic. You'll be happy to know I grow tomatoes and I have basil in my garden. It's the only thing that survives in Dubai, by the way. In South Africa, I was far better at gardening. Brian, I want you to jump in here. I mean, we've heard really interesting comments from not only David, but also from Michael as well. Tell me what you do at Haveli and how this speaks to the notion of what we've been seeing on food insecurity, technology, how that could play a role, and how you're seeing the future.
Yeah, at Haveli we invest in software and different technology that businesses use to help become more efficient. And as a conservationist, especially in land conservation, that's something that we really focus on. One of the challenges as we kind of continue to look for arable land and farming land is that we're just mindful about being most efficient around the land that we use. We get all these resources from the natural world, and I think so often we kind of underestimate how valuable they are to us. So things like clean water, clean air, soil restoration, things that we occur naturally, we don't really appreciate those things until we lose them, oftentimes by farming the wrong land. I have a lot of experience down in South America, and one of the last projects that I was involved in was the most recent establishment in Colombia of a national park, and that park is really very important ecologically from a biodiversity standpoint. And we had to spend a lot of time restoring that land because it was used for cattle farming. And it was a really inefficient land for cattle farming, so it didn't make a ton of sense in the first place. It was inefficient from a caloric standpoint, and then because of the degradation of the land, it had negative effects on kind of surrounding much more productive farmland. So
the soil actually was destroyed, right?
Soil, there was cloud forest nearby, and so by taking that down, it affected kind of the rainfall in the area, caused flooding in areas that there shouldn't have been flooding. And so one of the big areas where I think we can use technology is being a little bit more thoughtful from a planning standpoint. You talk about smart cities, we can be much smarter about the way we think about using the existing land we have for farming and making sure we protect biodiverse areas that actually help the farming as well. And then we don't have to recreate technologically certain things that we just get naturally.
Okay, super fascinating. And technology plays such a huge role, right, in everything that all of you are focusing on. David, for you, vertical farming is becoming something that everyone is talking about. We've seen incredible projects that seem to be working really well around the world. How would you say vertical farms can be a solution?
Well, it's tough. Right now, they work in a very few amount of crops because the economics, the capital costs are high, and as the cost of an LED and those costs come down, then they'll be viable for more crops. you do find niches. So like one of my companies is focused on hyper-local growing. So especially in food deserts in the US, so communities can grow and source food. So it depends very much on the application. With insects and crickets, part of what makes the economics from an environmental standpoint is you look at resources in and what the output is. So if a cow has to, as an example, eat like 40x what it needs to produce like a pound of protein, if it needs to eat 40 pounds of proteins, that's a tough equation and it puts a lot of stress on the environment. So crickets is the most effective way I've seen to produce a protein, where it's like 1-to-1, that ratio. And that's where we have to look at technological solutions, but also cultural solutions, and get people to think about these things beyond technology. What are the human behavioral elements of what counts? But I'd say from a technology standpoint, it's like whether it's robotics, genetic sequencing, LEDs, AI, biology is really tough. And there's a lot of ways to improve yield by changing the environmental factors, and that has a huge impact on cost of goods sold. And that's where AI has a tremendous impact to go through all those simulations and understand what's the best cause and effect.
Michael, from a diplomacy perspective, from a policy perspective, I know that UN Habitat works with various countries around the world. What kind of policies have you seen come to the fore in terms of turning, because you've got to retrofit cities essentially, unless you're building something from scratch, where there are some cases in the world where you see that, but mostly you've got to adapt a city that's already in existence, and that's tough.
Exactly, that's always a bigger challenge. As you said, there are some new projects where we see brand new cities built, but that's not necessarily the prevailing trend. We indeed need to focus better on improving the situation in the existing cities, but also different types of human settlements. And we advocate very strongly local solutions. You may have noticed that localization of SDGs has been one of the 12 high-impact initiatives that resonated during the SDG summit in September of last year in New York. What localization of SDG means is really involving not only the mayors, the governors, and other locally elected representatives. This is to a great extent part of the discussion at this summit as well, because we need to look at different levels of governance, but also other local actors, civil society, various activists and other groups of people. And we have seen that that people on the local level are extremely creative. They love innovations. They know what to do, both culturally and of course in practical terms. You cannot impose some of those solutions because it doesn't work. And if those solutions are locally owned and locally driven, then they are also sustainable oftentimes. So national governments, for example, need to create the legislative frameworks, or they need to create maybe some support schemes, financial and other. But it's a lot about empowering the local actors. And UN Habitat is actually now the permanent co-chair of what we call Local 2030 Coalition in the whole UN system. And actually the rotating co-chair of the Local 2030 Coalition for 2024 is FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. So it also is a bit of a hint that we are looking at solutions that go across the board.
Fantastic. Did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, on the policy side, I see a lot of governments mess things up. Well-intentioned, but mess things up. Water is a good example. So people won't think there should be free water, so they reduce the price of water, but that takes away the ability of free markets to solve that problem. And we want the innovators to solve these things. So sometimes putting a price on elements that you want to restore and forcing the solution to the markets is the better way to go. As the entrepreneur, as the innovator, we want commerce to put a price on carbon, to put a price on water, to put a price on feed. And
So
then
you're saying water should increase in price?
it should go to where the market is. Where we try and artificially change the prices, then one might want to do good in one place, but you're taking away the incentives for the markets to solve a problem. So if the price should be higher, let it go higher. If you want to protect, let's say, residential areas, then you could protect residential areas, but you have to watch out. There could be someone that's solving a problem in residential areas. So it's better run it through commerce, so maybe give some extra money to someone to pay more for water. Don't just reduce the price of water.
I mean, this is really interesting. What do you think of pricing water? This is, this is exactly what's worrying me.
Well, we have that problem in California. It's exactly the dynamic that David's talking about, where they had available water for kind of alternative farming resources, and so people didn't really price in the externalities of pushing water to kind of less productive areas. So you had water going for construction and less productive resources, where if they had priced it a little bit more efficiently, it would have gone to the food that people probably really need. And that's why you have this dynamic in California where like nuts are so expensive and citrus and other things like that. So I think with policy, it's important to bring together a lot of different areas of expertise. One of the challenges I think sometimes that happens is policy is made in silos. I do a lot of stuff in New Zealand, and 100 years ago, to solve the rabbit problem, the government decided to send away to the UK for some stoats, thinking that the stoats were going to eat the rabbits. The problem is stoats don't eat rabbits, and so then they ended up with a stoat problem and a rabbit problem, and it's because they didn't pay attention to what their scientists told them. And I think that's a huge challenge that we have in policymaking today. The stuff that we're talking about is a combination of commerce, science, and kind of resource planning. And some stuff on the face of it might sound crazy, kind of pricing water based on kind of what the best marginal use of it is. But actually, if you step back and talk to people who are involved in it, they can give you examples of why that does make sense and how it's going to fit kind of a specific system over time.
I mean, the water issue, Michael, I think is something that people are scared of, right? I mean, is it going to be one of those other traded commodities where it's going to be difficult to access because now it suddenly is going to be floated, mind the pun, on the the markets, and now the cost of me using water has increased dramatically. Is that what it's going to take to ensure that we have water security down the line? Because then you have to think about the lower LSM and what that means for them as well.
Indeed, we have close to 1 billion people globally that are experiencing some sort of issues with water scarcity. So we cannot ignore that problem. Again, I would advocate for local solutions because this is where we need to look first. But obviously, it's also a lot about inequalities.
Which have grown, by the way, over the past few years, specifically since the pandemic.
Exactly, and the pandemic indeed has exacerbated some of the inequalities. And again, it's linked to housing, but it's also linked to access to energy and access to food. So we need to design comprehensive solutions. And technology can be extremely supportive of that. That's one important track. Then I also wanted to mention that as part of our work as UN Habitat, we have a program which brings together water operators globally. There is international cooperation of water operators that share experience about water supply and of course also technological solutions, and oftentimes they support each other with innovations, because obviously if something has already been invented someplace, it's better just to get it from the partner rather than start the whole new issue. Market of course has to be part of the solution. But given the inequalities and given the climate change challenges, it's not enough. So water diplomacy, for that matter, or solutions on the international level are crucial.
You put your hand up, David.
Just want to add in terms of technology adoption and inequality. Often technology, if you look at the technology adoption curve, you have early adopters, then you have mainstream, then you have laggards. And for the entrepreneur, the innovator, you want to go for the early adopters that are more likely to adopt. So where there's either high pain, high political will, high spending, and those early adopters are often like the groups that have more. So if you look at solar, for example, the early adopters were Germany, the US, and then we had mass manufacturing, China, the cost curve goes down, and now you have solar and distributed like sub-Saharan Africa, and you have more equality. The point is, you have to let the markets work through the early adopters to mainstream, and it doesn't happen instantaneously. So if you have an innovation, it's okay if the innovation serves a market first as those costs go down and it can become more mainstream.
I'd like to take sort of a step back and look at the macro picture again. I think, we always look at we're forecasting and we're seeing what do we need to price in. Higher oil and gas prices or higher energy prices, whatever the energy source might be down the line, scarcity, more geopolitical tensions, inequalities. We don't know what the world will look like. But the food insecurity question is one that keeps on coming through. You're seeing inflationary impacts hitting so many people around the world. We see what it's doing to the continent of Africa. I mean, so many countries are under pressure because of the war in Ukraine, for example. There's spillover. If I had to say to you, describe what the world and sort of food supply would look like in, say the next 15 years, would it be optimistic? Would you say that it's going to mimic what we're seeing right now, or would you see something a lot more expensive, a lot more inflationary, and very different? Let's start with you, Brian.
I think we have a lot of control over what that outcome is. I'm an investor, so I'm an optimist, and so there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, especially around technology, yield management technology, software, like what I do. David mentioned generative artificial intelligence, or a lot of these statistical algorithms that can help us optimize, the way that we think about individualizing farmland. We are so used to personalization in all of our consumer products, and we're a little bit lagging behind the way we think about kind of personalizing and seed-specific areas, for example, for farming. In terms of water, climate change, unfortunately, seems to be very real. Hopefully that's not as controversial anymore, and how do you plan for it? One of the things that I think people are optimistic about in my part of the world is just innovations in energy. And so if the innovations in energy that are coming through, things like fusion, start coming more to fruition, you're going to see, for example, the cost of desal go way down, and that's going to be a huge opportunity. In the meantime, though, we have to protect the aquifers and waterways that we have, and that's where the conservation comes in. We're not doing ourselves any favors if we continue to pollute the natural resources that we have today. And until those technology innovations, really come to fruition, we've got to double down on protecting them. Otherwise, the insecurity that people feel around rising prices for household goods and even transportation and fuel, the way people react will pale in comparison to the way people react when they can't feed their kids or get enough water for their family.
It's very true. It's all about perspective, really. The climate emergency is real, yeah.
So I'd build on that and make 2 points. One, if you look at COVID, so there were a lot of shocks to our food system during COVID, and we ask ourselves, do we want a more resilient food system? And there is sort of a knee-jerk reaction to yes, and unfortunately this is where I think it's less of a trend and more like an episodic event, and we sort of forgot about how unresilient our food systems are. We have a lot of consolidation in food manufacturing, which adds a lot of stress. So I hope there's going to be more democratization of our food systems, and there are ways to do it. One of the ways is like vertical farming in the sense of localization of food production, whether it's insects or plants. Another way is like alternative
basically
proteins.
What I'm asking, are we going to be eating insects in the next 15 to 20 years?
I think we should.
If you dip them in chocolate, they're not as bad.
Yeah, we were talking, we used to sell them
Brian, it sounds like you've tasted insects, no?
Not by choice.
Okay.
we used to have a facility in Austin.
Oh, really? All right. I don't think I tried them there. There was a restaurant in Austin that had fried crickets, but it's a different story. It involved
Where do you think
tequila.
they got their crickets from?
Yeah.
And just collect them off the floor. But but there are going to be alternative proteins and alternative ways to produce food. And I think there's going to be more acceptance of people, so of how we consume our foods and these proteins.
Yeah, and what that food system would look like in these smart cities, right?
That's a key issue indeed. How to incorporate the new digital solutions or AI solutions that really are accelerating into the food chain situation as well. But you asked about how we see some of these things in the near future. What I have to add is that I am most concerned about situations of conflict and also areas that are hit by droughts or by severe natural disasters. And of course, at least from our perspective at the UN, we can do a lot, and we continue doing a lot for standard situations, and indeed where we can improve innovations, we can improve supply chains and all that. But of course, we cannot forget about those who are potentially left behind, and the gap is huge.
I'm glad you mentioned, conflict situations. I mean, when we see what's happening in Gaza now, and there's I've lost count of how many buildings have been destroyed and the percentage of infrastructure that's been destroyed. I mean, there's basically nothing left. It's like rebuilding that. What does that look like? When I see the destruction in Ukraine, or when I see what's happened in Syria, I mean, frankly, I can mention a plethora of places that have seen infrastructure destroyed. How do you rebuild that? Is this an opportunity? I mean, obviously, it's absolutely devastating. It's traumatic. But I guess you get to rebuild.
It's a huge task that we have already embarked on, both for Gaza and for Ukraine. Of course, we are not there yet, because with an ongoing conflict, you cannot do a full-scale reconstruction and rebuilding. But at least I can assure you that we are already working hard on the planning side, on mapping, on the reconnaissance, but also on shelter solutions, which are imminent. The moment we can really start with full-scale reconstruction and rebuilding, we will have to build back better. It sounds a bit like a catchphrase, but in these cases it really means a lot, because
quick. I mean, what are you going to? 2 million people are destitute right now in Gaza, for example.
You cannot just build to where it was before.
Yeah.
Now we are looking at assessments already to see, in which areas it is advisable, or it makes sense to rebuild. In which areas maybe we will need to rethink the whole pattern. And again, we have to build in a better way for the future. President Erdogan talked a bit earlier in the main plenary room about the unfortunate earthquake in his country.
Yes.
And we are assisting Turkey with the same, ensuring that they build back better. Not only in terms of standards that need to be improved and all that, but that we avoid mistakes from the past, and that we ensure that we indeed focus on smart solutions and solutions for the future, because as I often say, future starts today. It is not a distant category.
I love that. That's amazing. The future starts today. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. Thank you.